Oh yeah, Renee Lung, please, with a big applause.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Renee. I am a software engineer at PagerDuty, and today I'm going to speak a little bit about how you can use coaching techniques and developing your emotional intelligence to build some really healthy DevOps culture. Let's see. Yeah, so I run engineering interview slots fairly frequently at PagerDuty, mostly to ensure that there's at least one woman on every interview loop, especially when interviewing women. But what I've learned through this process is that checking every box from a technical perspective, it still doesn't guarantee a job offer. And this speaks largely to the importance of so-called soft skills. So in addition to technical ability, we want to know that the candidate is going to contribute positively to their team, to their department, and to company culture. So organizations have long recognized that there are huge returns to be had from investing in their employees' well-being. Not only do they reap the benefits of increased productivity, but there's also the less quantifiable advantages of higher employee engagement and job satisfaction. And there are a lot of ways to do this. And we can see in our tech bubble these investments come in the form of job perks like gym memberships or catered lunches or unlimited vacation. But these kinds of incentives only go so far. Eventually, every office is going to have a twisty slide or a bouncy castle or a unicorn petting zoo. And it becomes evident that there's a limit to how much you can rely on extrinsic motivations to build a vibrant, productive work environment. So intrinsic motivators, however, are much more sustainable and speak to a person's internal drive to excel. One author suggests that people are intrinsically motivated when they understand why they're doing something, and the best leaders put the correct conditions in place to ensure that people gain this deeper connection. Also, you have self-determination theory, which suggests that competence, relatedness, and autonomy are three basic psychological needs, and you can encourage and develop all these through coaching. Now, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that people with effective coaches are more productive, they're more confident, and they're better communicators. And there's no rule about who can and can't be coached. Coaching can benefit everyone from individual contributors to team leads, from managers to executives. And even though a lot of different kinds of people can be coached, there are definitely some commonalities in the benefits that people find from coaching. So people who benefit from coaching feel more self-reliant. They get more job and life satisfaction. They feel like they're contributing more effectively to their team and organization, and they also feel empowered to take greater responsibility for their actions and their commitments. Now, the 2002 book, Primal Leadership, identifies 6 emotional leadership styles and their potential impact on people, teams, and organizations. The authors argue that effective leaders know when and how to combine these different styles of leadership, and that no single style is intrinsically better than another. The commanding style, for example, uses an autocratic approach and relies on orders and tight control. Today, I'm going to be focusing on the coaching style of leadership, which is based on encouragement and empathy. Now, this style requires a great deal of emotional intelligence, which is something I'm going to touch upon later. And rather than telling people what to do, a coach helps to align an individual's goals with team and organizational objectives, and coaching helps develop sustainable and long-term intrinsic motivation. So on my team at PagerDuty, when an intern or a juniorish engineer joins the team, 2 people volunteer to be their coach and their mentor. But you're asking, what's the difference? On our team, a mentor acts as a model or an example to follow. They provide a concrete example of skill sets or expertise that the new person can strive for. They provide technical guidance to acclimatize our new team member to to our workflow, from planning to code review to deployment to operations. A coach's role, on the other hand, is much less prescriptive. So rather than providing an externally defined goal, coaches help the coachee determine that goal for themselves based on their own interests and their own aspirations. And so rather than providing a destination, a coach helps that person to build a framework for analysis so that person can find that destination for themselves. So just to be perfectly clear, this talk is not meant to be a crash course in coaching. There are a lot of resources out there for you to read and to watch. But rather, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a few concepts that can be applied to day-to-day life in a DevOps engineering context immediately. So when it comes to career and management coaching, there's generally two types. There's coaching for performance and coaching for development. Coaching for performance is about fixing a specific problem, and you need it for dealing with the everyday stuff, which is still really important. And within the context of my team, coaching for performance aligns really well with the kind of concrete technical leadership that the mentors are providing. Coaching for development, however, it shifts the focus away from specific issues and instead focuses on the person facing those issues. So the everyday problems are going to get solved, but shifting our focus allows for some personal insight and growth along the way. Now, this shift in focus from problems to people also requires changing our approach to thinking about how we get to a solution. And this is actually a bit more difficult than it sounds. Because as soon as we're presented with a problem, every part of our being is itching to find an answer. And that's because we solve problems. That is like literally what we get paid to do. We love figuring out puzzles and finding solutions and just getting things done. But when someone starts talking about a challenge they're facing, whether it's like a personal thing affecting their work or whatever, it's rarely the actual problem. Often it's a symptom of a deeper underlying issue, perhaps one that's complex or difficult to articulate. And when you are coaching someone, if you jump in with an apparent solution like, oh, I know the answer to your problem. Hold on. Jumping in with an apparent solution might make things even worse because maybe you've misidentified the problem because you jumped in too early. Or maybe you just end up solving the problem yourself, and we've all been there where it's just easier to do it instead of telling someone what to do. Or maybe the problem never actually gets solved because even though you're trying to do the thing where you solve the problem yourself, you can't because you already have way too many commitments on your plate. Also, I feel my mic cutting out. So resisting the urge to fix or rescue things might be one of the most important parts to coaching practice because without it, you won't have the space to do the thing that makes coaching so effective, and that's asking questions. And part of the difficulty of putting coaching into practice is that we're biased towards action and we're biased towards providing input. Adopting this less telling mindset works against what we've been trained to do. So asking questions rather than providing the answers can feel really unproductive, really foreign, and kind of weird. But you need to trust that you're being useful and that this is a situation for a different kind of helpfulness. Just because your advice isn't the optimal tool to use in this situation doesn't mean that it's not valuable elsewhere. There's a time and place for advice, but when you're coaching development, what's important is that the coachee finds those answers on their own. And in this relationship, the journey is just as, if not more important than the destination. Now, coaching can be a powerful process of ideation because coachees are discovering the solutions for themselves. But helping people learn and helping people reach those conclusions can be difficult. They don't really learn, as we said earlier, when you just tell them something. They don't really learn when they're cargo culting, just going through the motions doing something. They start to learn when they have time to recall and to reflect. And this is known as a process of double loop learning. If the first loop is fixing the actual problem at hand, then the second loop is learning from the process. And in this second stage, there's been time to step back, recall, and to find insight. In The Coaching Habit, the author Stanler points out that advice is overrated. I can tell you something, and it's got a limited chance of making its way into your brain's hippocampus, the region that encodes memory. But if I ask you a question and you come up with that answer yourself, the odds increase substantially. So essentially, coaching is about asking the right questions, not small talk questions like, oh, what'd you do this past weekend? Hey, sports team. But essential questions that transcend the noise of everyday business and day-to-day distractions. By asking meaningful questions, we can harness the power of inquiry to guide someone to the answers that they likely already know, or to jumpstart the process of developing a solution to the challenges that they face. But asking questions is only useful if you take the time to listen to the answers. Like most aspects of coaching, it sounds like common sense, sounds super easy, but I guarantee you this doesn't actually happen very often. Just as asking the right questions is important, we need to listen effectively. So few of us actually do this. Many of us listen as a way of waiting for our turn to speak, and I see the irony as I'm literally just like talking at you from here. But putting aside the instinct to give advice can put you in the state of mind necessary to engage in the focused listening that you need to build the foundation of a coaching relationship. Sometimes what the situation might call for is the time and the space to answer some of these essential questions that you've come up with. So another barrier to listening effectively is being uncomfortable with silence. Now, just an aside, this point was totally redundant and didn't make any sense when I was in Sweden, because apparently Swedes are already really comfortable with silence. So take it with a grain of salt. This is mostly geared towards native English speakers. But to get back to it, if we fill up every minute of conversation by speaking, then we avoid ever having to navigate the awkward pause, the one where you don't know if you're supposed to make eye contact, you all of a sudden don't know where your pockets are, so, oh God, what do I do with my hands? But studies show that among English speakers, we only leave fractions of a second between taking turns to talk. This isn't universal, as I mentioned, because what one culture may perceive as awkward, others see it as a moment for contemplation or maybe even an acknowledgement of what the last speaker said. Anglophones tend to be the most uncomfortable with long pauses, so we fill up these silences to indicate agreement and rapport. Now, in contrast, Japanese speakers are happy with silences of up to 8.2 seconds, which is more than twice as long as their North American counterparts. In Japan, the concept of harage suggests that the best communication is actually when you don't need to speak at all. No one's saying anything, but everybody is thinking. Silence at that point can be a very positive thing. So what coaching requires is that we reframe our thinking around conversational silence and what it can mean or signify. Because when you've asked someone one of those really good, really essential questions, sometimes all you're going to get back is silence. Yeah, sometimes 6 whole seconds of silence, which to English speakers can feel like a really, really awkward eternity. But when we stop seeing that pause as a void to fill or a difference of opinion, we can reframe it as part of a meaningful conversation. We can take it as a sign that we're on the right track, that we're asking the right questions, and maybe the person you're coaching is the kind of person that needs a few minutes to formulate their answer, or maybe they're the kind of person that will figure it out as the words fall out of their mouth. But either way, that silence indicates that they're thinking, they're creating new neural pathways, and they're increasing their own potential. So bite your tongue and don't fill the silence. It will probably be really uncomfortable, but that's totally fine. It creates the space for learning and for insight. So basically, I've spent the past 14 minutes telling you that you talk too much, you don't listen very well, and that you're actually kind of rude. But what's important to remember is that when you're developing a coaching practice, telling less, listening more, and appreciating silence are real challenges because effective coaching can be very different from the way we're used to excelling in our day-to-day work environments. However, these challenges, they're not insignificant, but I guarantee you they're totally worth the work to overcome because of the valuable lessons learned along the way. Now, I'm a software engineer on a team with like 12 other engineers. We're a giant team. But on my team, the coaches are also engineers. And coaching has made me become much more flexible and much more consistently aware of the larger picture of our team goals. And even when I'm on a completely different work stream, I try to stay aware of the status of my coachees' tasks, so our weekly check-ins require a lot less contextualizing from the start. And most of our interactions take place within the context of everyday engineering work, so we can kind of use that relationship in reverse as well. We can apply that lens when trying to understand the challenges my coachee faces, technical or otherwise. We're building a relationship outside of engineering work that can make it easier to work collaboratively later on because trust and communication have already been established. Now, having this, building the foundation of this relationship can create an environment of safety and trust, and not only improves team dynamics, but it provides a space that encourages honesty and openness, two essential components of learning and writing good code, which is why I'm convinced that my team is one of the highest performing ones, simply because by building these coaching relationships and putting these techniques into practice, we've actually become better teammates, better coworkers, and friends. So when it comes to the non-technical benefits of learning to coach, the applications are much clearer. Coaching requires real empathy, a sense of empathy that's not grounded in self-interest, but is genuinely centered around another person. So this goes back to listening effectively and not waiting for your turn to speak. Because we can't effectively listen if our brain is rummaging around looking for a similar experience or a feeling from our past to give the advice that we probably shouldn't be giving. Coaching means learning how to listen deeply and thoughtfully. So by deeply listening and understanding what is being said, we have a better chance of seeing the whole picture. Effective listening also builds relationships with our peers by acknowledging the value of their opinions and by acknowledging the value of their expertise. Learning to coach and practicing coaching requires a great deal of self-awareness. So working with the coachees to overcome their underlying reasons for anxieties, I have been able to identify these same insecurities in myself, and working with them to find solutions has really taught me how valuable it is to put the work in to do the same thing for my own self-doubts. So as I mentioned earlier, coaching not only requires emotional intelligence, but it helps you to improve it. So what is emotional intelligence? It's the ability to recognize your emotions, understand what they're telling you, and realize how they affect the people around you. But it also involves your perception of others. When you understand how they feel and why they're feeling that way, it allows you to manage and nurture your relationships much more effectively. So we probably know someone who is a really good listener, that one person that always knows just what to say. They're honest when they give you feedback, and it leaves you feeling inspired to change rather than just kind of, oh, deflated, I suck, blah. Even if you leave a conversation without a solution, you still feel hopeful and optimistic. So whether this is through practice or a combination of their personality traits, these kinds of people have a really high degree of emotional intelligence. Now, the good news for all of us jerks is that emotional intelligence can be learned and developed through practice. First of all, be open and accepting of others' needs. Different people are going to need to communicate differently. Practice humility. You can be quietly confident about your accomplishments, but consider giving others a chance to shine. Don't think of accomplishments as an opportunity for credit, but just celebrate your team wins. Recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. Acknowledge areas where you improve. This is pretty important given the situations that a lot of us can find ourselves in. Stay calm and controlled when things don't go to plan. Try to reframe adversity as just another opportunity to be really awesome. Take responsibility for your actions. Apologize when you do a bad, and be gracious when someone else apologizes to you. This sounds really like preschool, be nice to your classmates, but I guarantee you these are not the easiest things to implement. So finally, examine how your actions are going to affect others before you take those actions. Practice empathy and put yourself in their shoes. So development coaching is essentially helping someone to improve their emotional intelligence while at the same time demanding that you do the same in order to be an effective coach. And like all of these strategies, doing it can be a challenge, so be kind to yourself, give yourself the time and space to practice and make mistakes. All right, so what does all of this have to do with DevOps? Now, one of the first lessons I learned when learning how to do the DevOps at PagerDuty is that you never actually do anything on your own. And this is both an observation and it's a directive. When we take actions collectively, when we share the burden of responsibility when things go really bad, we know that support structure is there, and it reduces the anxiety of personal failure, which just leaves much more room, a lot more bandwidth for problem solving and getting things done. Now at PagerDuty, we've identified and we value this as a culture of blamelessness. And it's one of the ways that we practice empathy in engineering. I don't think it's always obvious how emotional intelligence and identifying your feelings can be immediately applicable to working in a tech environment, but practicing empathy in engineering levels the playing field by acknowledging that whether you're fresh out of school or you're the most senior of the seniorest devs, everyone makes mistakes, and it stresses that what's important is that we share and that we learn from those mistakes so we can continuously iterate and continuously improve on our processes. With empathy comes an understanding that we're more than just a collection of technical skills. We are humans with needs, wants, and emotions, and we can encourage a culture of coaching leadership that values sharing and openness. And by doing so, we build deeper, more meaningful, and more effective relationships between our teams and our organization. Because it's not immediately obvious, engineering is essentially a social exercise. Former Googler Jonathan Zunger, and I am probably massacring that name, points out that engineering is not the art of building devices, it's the art of fixing problems. Devices are a means, not an end. Essentially, engineering is all about cooperation, collaboration, and empathy for both your colleagues and your customers. So although we spend a lot of time talking to computers and making those computers talk to other computers, at the end of the day, we're people working with people, making software for other people. Now, organizations change, teams grow, software becomes obsolete, but that doesn't change how effective a people-first approach to building and operating high-velocity organizations can be. Under all of that automation and monitoring, DevOps is about making lives better by acknowledging and serving the needs of the human side of tech. After this presentation, I'm going to invite you to think about how some of these concepts can be applied to your everyday life, whether in meetings, collaboration, or even outside of the workplace. Because we can all afford to do less telling, do more listening, and learn to be comfortable with silence. By enacting some fundamental precepts of coaching, it can go a long way to contributing positively to building a healthy, people-focused DevOps practice. Now, you don't need the words coach or mentor on your business card in order to adopt a coaching mindset when working with your colleagues. Regardless of your job title, coaching can help you help your peers develop professionally and personally. You can reinvigorate your organization's culture while deepening your own self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Thank you very much. think we have some time for questions. Did anyone have a question?
Oh, and yep.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
So what I'm basically wondering is, how did the culture of coaching get started at PagerDuty? Was it like one of the founders that instilled that as a basic concept, or did you figure out that it was a sort of a way to solve a problem that you had at the company?
Okay, that's a really good question. So the way it started was, I think it is still mostly limited to my team, but we work with a lot of other teams because of cross-functional and like cross-team projects. But about 2 years ago, we hired a new manager, Graham Toppin, and he was my manager when I was a junior engineer at PagerDuty. And I honestly don't think I would have gotten the promotion that I did if it weren't for his guidance. He wasn't telling me what to do, but he was like really pushing me to identify the things that I needed to do. And I think he had a lot of influence on not just me, but also the senior engineers on our team. And when Yulia, she was a tech lead, she became our engineering manager. She carried on this process or carried on this tradition of coaching and worked with other engineers on the team to kind of, so that we all had the opportunity to learn those techniques and to build that kind of relationship with our peers. Oh, I think there's a question there and there's a question there.
Thank you. Hi. Do you have any way to measure the effectiveness of coaching program at PagerDuty?
That's a pretty good question because you don't really know, you can't really tell what you can't really put a number on it. I would say that the closest thing that we have is a quarterly health check that we do within teams. And that's kind of asking our teams questions about, how do you feel about your ease of deployment? Really good, kind of good, no opinion, really shitty, oh my God, I hate my life. And like this is across how do I feel we are working as a team? How do I feel about our process? How do I feel about the value we're creating? And generally, my team is consistently really, really happy with process. When we do identify something that isn't quite working for us or that is taking our team down, we are able to address it and change things really quickly because we're so honest and open with each other. So it's not necessarily the most quantitative measurement, but it's definitely a trend that we can see from quarter to quarter. And did you have a question? Okay.
Oh, and I'm running.
Hi. Yeah, so this is a follow-up to the first question. Why do you think it hasn't spread to other teams at PagerDuty coaching?
Okay, so probably the reason why is I know that a few other teams have kind of like adopted the model, but not exactly. I think it's mostly because we're a really big organization. And that is one of the challenges that we face as an organization is having teams collaborate not just on technical processes, but also kind of like the non-technical processes and culture that we have. I find that the culture like within teams is very, very distinct. And that's definitely one thing that I think that we should work on, and that's communication between teams that goes beyond just like, yo, your service is upstream from mine and it's breaking my stuff. So yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up.
There are a few people in the world who have almost like an allergy to coaching. What do you do in cases when the response is, well, stop asking me all those questions, just say me what to do?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's actually a really good question. And I can guarantee you sometimes I would be in my one-on-ones with Graham being like, oh my God, just stop. You just tell me the answer. My brain is mush and I'm really, really tired. Now, I would say that then you need to shift kind of like your line of questioning, because obviously that's not getting you anywhere. I think maybe at that point, you might need to ask them, okay, why do you want me to just give you the answer? Like, let's talk through that, because is it fatigue? Is it because these questions that I'm asking you are not even like getting close to what's important to you? Like, just tell me what you want out of this process, because unless their expectations and your expectations are aligned, I don't think it's going to be a very fruitful relationship for anyone. Does that answer your question?
It's more questions, but
Okay, yeah. Cool. So I think we're out of time.
Yes.
Just one thing for our friend that asked about Rails. I would suggest looking up pt-osc on GitHub. A former engineer at PagerDuty wrote a gem specifically for those migrations. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Renee.